to today's session at the Skoll World Forum Virtual Edition. Let me share my screen and we will get underway. All right, so today's session is all about upskilling workers for the future of work. We've got a great global audience, an exciting program put together for you today, and I'm just so pleased that so many of you have come together from around the world. Feel free to use social media. I think we're supposed to use the hashtag skollgoesvirtual, and let's get underway. Or maybe not. All right, so let's start by trying the chat window. You have all started on mute, but we will unmute you for the latter part of the session. But we will use the chat window throughout, and I'd like to introduce and I'll shortly introduce my colleague Chandni. Chandni Hirani is going to be helping us moderate our session, and so we will be using the chat window throughout to collect your comments and your questions so that we can curate a great discussion after the formal presentation. So with that said, let's try the chat window with a fun icebreaker. I thought it might be fun to do something a little less serious. So I thought it might be fun for us to all use the chat window and share how you've been taking care of yourself during this unsettling and difficult time. So we all know self-care is important. And I will share by saying that I have been invited to a chair yoga session today. And so that's pretty fun. So please, let's take a look at the chat. And okay, so you have a morning, oh my goodness, someone starts at 5:50 a.m. That is not me. Hello, everybody. So try using the chat window. You should see it at the bottom of your screen. And just try and type in something, since we'll be using this to collect your comments and questions. Try typing something that, that you've been doing to take care of yourself. All right, morning and evening walks, gardening, that's good. Knitting, sports, yeah. Jennifer, you might want to join me for chair yoga. Wonderful. Okay, it looks like everyone has found the chat button and found a way to take care of yourselves during this very difficult pandemic time. And so I hope everyone's staying healthy and safe. And it's good to see so many folks finding ways to do that. All right, let's move on. All right, so hi, Skoll World Forum. We're SkillNav. My name is Clara Chow. I serve as the founder and CEO of SkillNav, which is actually a project under a larger nonprofit called Generation Enterprise. Some of my teammates are on the call today, and in particular, I'll call out the lovely, the one and only Chandni Hirani. Chandni is a professor at the Africa Leadership University, and she also is the founder of a green technology, sustainable energy company in her native Nairobi, her hometown. And so Chandni, thank you for joining us today. And again, Chandni will be helping us moderate our discussion. But a little bit about us. We run a skills development technology. We're a mission-driven tech company. And what we're focused on is upskilling for the future of work, which is the topic of today's conversation. We'll talk more about what SkillNav is at the end, but for now, let's just say that it is a career GPS that's meant to help workers map their way out of poverty and into prosperity, and also to help small businesses map the career path for their workers, increasing retention, productivity, and growth. So that is the story of SkillNav. We are currently working in Lagos, Nigeria, but we are looking to expand, and we do have some interesting case studies to share from our experience working with small businesses. We've worked with some 1,500, working with low-skilled and at-risk youth, and also working with local and federal governments. So here's the plan for today's session. We're going to talk about work. Then we're going to talk about school. We're going to talk about skills. Then we're going to take it into the African context. And then we'll talk about the idea of a career GPS. So let's start with work. I'm going to start by talking about what it is, how it's changing, and why this matters. So the first thing to share is that work is about more than money. Humans, I believe, and I'm curious to hear in the chat if you believe, that humans need work. Now, for me, work is about more than just income. And if you think about yourselves, think about what you get from your work. And also think about those who can't work and what they lose from that. You know, we at SkillNav believe that work has 3 core components when it's good work. We'll talk about bad work in a moment. But we believe work actually is a venue and vehicle for personal growth and development, also for income and livelihood, which is the first thing most people think of, and then also a way to participate in and contribute to society. And the UNDP agrees. They say that work is intrinsically linked to human development. And so that means that even if we as a society, globally, locally, what have you, even if we move to universal basic income, there are going to be important physical, psychological, and community health issues that will result if there is no work. And Atlantic Magazine here in the United States actually did a study and has written a lot of really powerful articles about displaced workers, primarily in the United States. You know, they really observed in one article in particular that most people want to work and are miserable when they cannot. And it kind of goes, again, beyond the loss of income, and it comes to a loss of status, a sense of demoralization and general malaise. And again, that's because at its best, work is a way to, number 1, grow, number 2, earn, and number 3, contribute. And so when we think about work, as we talk about the future of work, let's make sure we put it in its proper context and understand all the things that work means for human flourishing. Oops. But as I mentioned, you're probably thinking, and as you're probably thinking to yourself as you look at those 3 circles, most work is not all those 3 things. Decent work is hard to find. And decent work is the term used by the United Nations as part of the Sustainable Development Goals. This is SDG number 8. And as you can see here, it encompasses a couple different things, not just reaching employment and pay, fair pay, decent work, but also kind of reaching that work throughout society to promote youth employment and education, protecting labor rights, promoting safe working environments, and providing universal access to banking, insurance, and financial services. So while most work isn't what this goal is, this is something that we as a group are looking to strive for. And I have to say, you know, after spending my past 10 years has really been focused on working with the working poor. These are folks who are working full-time or sometimes more than full-time, juggling multiple jobs, but jobs that are precarious, poorly paid, and often exploitative, dangerous, soul-crushing, very far from this idea of decent work. And I think we've all seen what the human pain of bad work, indecent work, can look like. We're talking about financial insecurity, isolation, low self-worth, resentment, and hopelessness. And so really already there's a dynamic between the decent work we aspire to build and all the things, as we mentioned, that it provides versus indecent work. And so I think there is a question about whether the future of work will be decent. We've already talked about some of the difference between decent work and indecent work, good jobs and bad jobs, and we'll talk more about this. Professor Zeynep Tan, who talks about the good job strategy, where, good work is work that's engaged, that has engaged employees, happier customers, happier shareholders, but really it's about investing in people and systems and good job design. And then the opposite is bad work, where, as I mentioned, people are costs to be managed. We have an HR model where people churn and burn, hire and fire, because labor is cheap and not worth investing in. And as a result, it ends up being both kind of mind-numbing and boring, perhaps repetitive, and also precarious and low paid. So actually, before I talk about the future of work and how that changes it, I do think, again, it's important to remember that there is already good work, which not everyone has. There's a lot of bad work. And then the question of whether the future of work is going to lean more towards the good or the bad. So here, let me talk about the future. I'm showing an image here of robots and humans, a lot of real headlines, some scenarios that come from McKinsey's work on the future of work, and some different attributes of what a future of work could look like, which of course, some sound good, some sound bad, depending on whether, again, you're already in the good work bucket or the bad work bucket. I think the truth is, we've always worried about whether humans will be disrupted by robots or by technology and machines. Even here in the United States, in the late 1800s, early 1900s, automation was arriving and disrupting the workforce. So in this period, it came in the form of the tractor, and this was eliminating a ton of agricultural jobs. And a lot of people wondered what they were going to do and if there would be work. Fast forward a couple hundred years, 200 years, clearly we have found a way to keep people working. In fact, people are working more than ever. And so there, a scholar, David Autor, wrote about how, with the decline of farm work came a lot of new jobs. And similarly, with the new technological developments we're seeing now, the consensus is that tech disruption will not eliminate work, but it will change it. And so David Autor says, oh, we've got this. When we get disrupted, we'll do app development, radiological medicine, yoga instruction, per a lot of our notes here, Bitmoji, right? These are all things that didn't exist in the farm era, maybe didn't even exist a couple decades ago, but now they exist and there are new kinds of work, even when the old kinds of work have been displaced, replaced, and changed. That said, there is real concern that this time, things might be different. So let's take a look here about, let me just see if I can hide this, whoops. Can workers weather this new tech disruption? So McKinsey actually did this study where they took 2,000 different jobs, they grouped the activities in those jobs into eight different categories. And of those 8 different categories, 3 of them were vulnerable to disruption and indeed replacement. And they found that actually those 3 categories covered over 50% of current work activities. So that means 50% of current work activities can be automated, as you see here. Now, those are areas primarily in repeated physical tasks, very predictable and repeatable, and predictable and formulaic data processing tasks. Now, just because 51% of job activities can be automated doesn't mean that 51% of jobs will go away. Josefina, let's see.
Tenemos 6. ¿Tú cuánto estás viendo ya?
There we go. This is one of the fun parts of a virtual session. So just because 51% of job activities can go away doesn't mean 51% of jobs will go away. Jobs change. Jobs are made of many tasks. The problem, though, is more about whether those new changed jobs are still accessible to everyone. And I'll give you a preview. They're not accessible to everyone. And that's part of what makes this new disruption disturbing. So we're aware, I think, that there's already a huge divide, again, as I mentioned, between those with good work or decent work or good jobs and those who have the precarious, low-paid, and often exploitative, dangerous work. The question is whether that great divide will only deepen. And so the question is, in this future of work, do we see deeper divides? It's not just now about machines automating, putting more muscle and mechanization to what humans can do. Now we're seeing machine learning, neural networks, we're seeing technological disruption move into cognitive tasks. Again, whether it's networks that can see patterns and learn faster than we can, whether it's artificial intelligence making decisions that we can't explain. And so that's why we saw a lot of those dire pronouncements and headlines. And I think we're seeing even now with the COVID-19 crisis that this pandemic is deepening existing divides and exacerbating a lot of the inequality we see between good jobs that are stable, we're still being paid salaries, we can work from home, and then jobs that, because they're done in person, can't be done right now in a time of social distancing. And also jobs that, were actually rather precarious and unsustainable in the first place. So let's talk now about school. We just finished talking about work. And the reason why school is next is there's a widespread belief that school can save us. I want to say that school matters, but it won't save us in terms of saving us from inequality, from the Great Divide, and from the fact that a lot of our skills are now becoming obsolete. Let's talk a little bit about why. So first, let's start with the fact that quality education is of course important. Quality education, again, is defined by the UNDP, by the UN in the Sustainable Development Goals, is all about quality, so education that's effective, i.e. I teach you, you actually learn. Education that's accessible, so you can actually come to school, you can actually access the materials and learn, and the digital divide, again, is something that's being highlighted in this pandemic. And also education that's relevant. So what I'm teaching you in school is actually relevant and useful to you to help you thrive and become self-sufficient when you leave school. However, school isn't enough to overcome poverty and trauma. There's a widespread belief that, if we just improve school, then we can fill the skills gap and we can eliminate inequality and everyone can participate fully in the good work I mentioned. However, I think for those of us who have experience with education, which should be all of us, will know that school, what happens in school can either be reinforced and accelerated at home, or because of different barriers, including poverty and trauma, lack of infrastructure like electricity, lack of food, all of these things, preconditions for learning, don't exist equally. And as a result, it's tough for us and unfair of us as society to expect that school and teachers, in the time they have you in the classroom, they can actually overcome what folks are, the barriers people are facing. Similarly, traditional schooling isn't enough to equip students for a world of constant disruption. Think about traditional schooling right now. You start when you're a child, and then you graduate, and then that's it. So I've got my degree, maybe it's an electrical engineering degree, but maybe decades later what I learned isn't relevant anymore because the field of engineering has moved forward. And then also, a lot of the things we learn in school can't possibly prepare us for careers that haven't even begun, for technologies that haven't even been invented. And so again, in this constant disruption, this new environment, traditional schooling is not going to cut it. We're going to need to see continuous learning outside the classroom, and that means for us on the job, especially for folks who are low income and who can't afford to go back for full-time schooling. They need to learn while they earn. So now let's finish with skills. What are they? What do they need to be? What is the skills gap? And how do we fix it? So let's just start with what skills are. At SkillNav, we think they fall into two categories: what you can do and how you can do it. On the job, that applies to actual tasks, which are, if you were to take your job description and turn them almost into a little script for you to follow, what are those things that you're doing all the time? Preparing for the monthly report, going to certain meetings and updating people, pulling certain numbers, reviewing them, and then sharing them. So repeated job tasks, stocking shelves, seating a customer and then cutting their hair, then cleaning up and taking money. So these are repeated tasks, which are part of the what. Other types of tasks are one-time or time-bound projects that are assigned to us and that we finish by the due date, hopefully within budget. Then there's how you do work. These are the more nebulous world of mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors. So these are more intangible, often talked about as soft skills, but actually, as we'll talk about, soft skills are pretty hard. So while those are the different kinds of skills that we think about, what you do and how you do it, the categories of the what and the how fall into so many different skills frameworks. I'm not going to go through all of them. This is just a selection, but suffice it to say, many smart people in many different organizations across the world have thought about how to organize skills, especially when it comes to organizing skills for schools, for curriculum development, organizing skills for competency frameworks to evaluate people at work, organizing skills for certifications and assessments. So there are many frameworks. Let's stick with the idea that skills fall into what you do and how you do it. And let's use for a moment McKinsey's group of skills when we think about what skills are on the rise and which skills are kind of at risk in terms of relevance in the workforce. So the skills of the future are unsurprisingly technological skills. You can see that there's going to be huge demand, and in terms of the number of hours we spend using this skill, that's only going to increase. But it turns out that the skills of the future are also human, social and emotional skills, and higher order cognitive skills like problem solving. So these skills are not going away. And in fact, in a world of increasing technology, maybe they become the only way that we can future-proof ourselves, because technology changes. We'll be constantly learning and unlearning when it comes to new technology. But the enduring human skills, as put forth by the J-Well group at MIT, the enduring human skills are going to stick around. And so if we can master these skills, we can future-proof our careers, but also prepare our young people for a world of constant change. In fact, when I was at a session convened by J-Well a couple of weeks ago before all the quarantining started, we actually heard we had a seminar where leaders of companies were talking about how they end up hiring for hard skills, but firing for the soft ones. Because hard skills are easy to evaluate. There are a lot of credentials that could suggest you know how to do something, how, you know what to do or how to do technology. But when it comes to how you work on the job, your mindsets, attitudes, and behaviors, they're harder to assess, but they make a real difference on the job. And they are what you end up firing for, even if you've hired for the hard skills. And then let's just also add the fact that the skills gap is real. What you see here is the gap over time, just for a select snapshot, between job openings and the actual number of hires. The gap between the two suggests that even when a lot of people are out there looking for work, especially good work, better work, and even if those jobs are out there, something is wrong with this picture. Those people aren't connecting. And the thing that is preventing workers who want work from getting jobs that employers want to fill is this idea that workers don't have the skills, are not well equipped to integrate into those jobs. And so again, you know, some statistics here about how employers, according to Degreed, a survey they did, you know, 82% of employers are saying that they're having trouble filling positions. And some of these are even the most basic entry-level positions. But again, workers may be lacking even the most basic, again, not so basic, not so easy. You know, a lot of workers are lacking the even most basic employability skills, showing up to work on time, being professional communications, looking people in the eye, dressing appropriately, just even those basic things you need to get in the door. And students also are sharing that they're finding the job search frustrating, and that they don't feel like when they leave school, they were well equipped for the world of work. And so what does this mean? If there's a skills gap, it means that we need to upskill people, because upskilling is what you do when someone's in a job, but they're not fulfilling the requirements of that job. We need to upskill them to fill that gap. It also means that even if we had a lot of skills to begin with, we need to prepare for a lifetime of reskilling. Reskilling is when, even though I'm in a job right now and I'm doing it well, the world is changing, jobs are changing, or I'm trying to get promoted. And when I move into the new role, I need a new set of skills. And this is going to be important for all of us. Research by the World Economic Forum suggests that the half-life of skills these days is 5 years. Some of you may be familiar with the idea of a half-life. When it comes to radioactivity, that is it's this idea that radioactivity the radioactivity kind of decreases or halves over a certain interval. And what is that interval? That's the half-life. Similarly, the potency of our skills is going to decrease in this chart apparently every 3 years, 3 to 5 years. That means that in 3 to 5 years' time, think about all the skills you have, they're going to be half as useful. So what are you doing to fix that, to upskill or reskill in your role? And lastly, Africa. This is where it all comes to a head. We already talked about the disconnect between good work and bad work. We talked about the disconnect between jobs and workers. In Africa, there is a real struggle with skills gap because, to go to the education discussion, students are leaving school ill-equipped. I've met in my work in Lagos, I've met computer science graduates who haven't really touched computers. It's getting rarer, but there's still a feeling that a lot of education in emerging markets, and certainly on the continent, don't have relevant curricula, are not ill-equipped with the latest technology, are still very focused on lecturing at you versus applying skills and building skills in a living lab. And as a result, employers are saying, and recruiters are saying, that the existing pool of skills in sub-Saharan Africa isn't large enough to meet demand, the huge demand of this rising continent. And then the human tragedy of that is that there are already very few seats in universities. Students make huge sacrifices to go to school, and whether they're at the university level or whether they drop out somewhere along the way, when they come out into the workforce, they have a hard time finding work and end up, many of them, trapped in informal sector work. And so again, the idea of the skills gap really hurts workers, but I want to highlight that it also hurts, as I alluded to, the growth prospects of the continent, especially for small and medium enterprises who don't have the resources to hire expensive expat labor and bring that in, or to do full-time job training programs to upskill their workers. Many small and medium enterprises are headed up by plucky entrepreneurs, but who themselves don't have a lot of management experience. And so the skills gap is trapping young people in dead-end work, and it's capping the growth of the continent's businesses, which is a real risk. The engine of jobs creation is being stalled because of a low-skilled workforce, and the low-skilled workforce is desperate to improve their prospects and become more valuable in the world of work, but they don't know how, and they don't necessarily have the skills and resources to go about filling that gap, and so that leads to stalled growth. And that's really a tragedy on a huge scale, because as I think we're all aware, Africa is a rising continent. Africa is going to be where the growth is for the next couple of decades. But unfortunately, also for the next couple of decades, we're seeing 10 to 20 million new workers who are entering the job market. And if those conditions of skills gap persist, what could be a demographic dividend will instead be a ticking time bomb. And so at SkillNav, we believe that small and medium enterprises are part of the answer, but we need to equip them to fill the skills gap in a low-touch way that doesn't require additional HR and training resources, because that's just not realistic for many small and medium enterprises. That said, small and medium enterprises are the ones who are making 80% of all new hires. And so if we can equip Africa's youth to learn while they earn, prove new skills on the job, and be promoted based on competency and not on university and other credentials, then we have a fighting chance. And so that's where I'm going to end by telling you a little bit about SkillNav. So SkillNav is something that our nonprofit created. We actually built it in response to our own need, because our nonprofit, Generation Enterprise, has worked with over 1,500 small and medium enterprises, primarily in Lagos, Nigeria. And in scale, not only were we incubating many of these businesses, but for some of them, we built and tried to grow them ourselves. We thought of our businesses as not just SME, small and medium enterprise, but SME as in a social mobility enterprise. We were building businesses to upskill young people, especially the young people we worked with in slum communities like Makoko. However, we found that it was really hard to manage low-skilled young people. Even though they had a lot of will, the skills gap was such that we were constantly firefighting, micromanaging. We had a lot of customer service issues. One of our companies, for example, was a cleaning company. And try as we might, we just couldn't scale it beyond the micro level, which is kind of 10 employees, because we were just constantly needing to fix things or train people ad hoc on the job. And so SkillNav was something we created to actually lay out a career path for the young people, define at each career step what specific skills, both what to do and how to do it, that we needed them to learn and master and repeatedly demonstrate on the job. And then once we created that career path, we then had a bunch of social workers and counselors who would give them weekly feedback on what skills they were developing and what skills gaps still existed for them to close. This worked out so well that many local businesses, including our own customers in the cleaning company, asked us, "Where did you find these workers? They seem like students, not cleaners." And we said, well, actually, they are students. They are students in a management training program. Moreover, you can't just find these workers. You have to invest in and kind of make your own. And so we codified that into this tool called SkillNav, where we surface skills gaps, have a tool, which I'll explain, that actually closes that skills gap. And then, because that boosts the worker's own productivity and value, we're able to not only give them promotions so they grow and increase in income, responsibility, and role, but then also we as a business can grow because now we're more productive. And so that's really the mechanism of SkillNav. And I will share that, just to make it come full circle, if we're able to close the skills gap consistently and skill up our workers so we can scale up our businesses, that really tackles the SDGs we talked about earlier. SDG 4 around quality education, in this case, lifelong education, and SDG 8, which is all about decent work. And in particular, some elements are also about helping SMEs and MSMEs grow and formalize. So for us, SkillNav is really kind of two parts. One is that for workers, it's this career or skills GPS. So just like you have Google Maps that tells you where to go and whether you're on track, it recalculates to give you your route. We're doing that for people's careers and the skills they need in order to get where they want to go in their careers and in their income. So workers use our tool to map their way to better jobs and pay. But on the employer side, it's also a performance management tool and productivity tool that's helping businesses map their way to better productivity and expand their operations. And it does so with a couple different mechanics, which we saw actually in our own cleaning company, Zest. And so as I mentioned, we were really struggling to micromanage our workers. We were at 6 young people, kind of working part-time. And by implementing this system, which admittedly was a bit more of an investment up front because we had to design the tool and then we implemented it and built it into our workflow. But once we did, we saw workers' productivity increase, their morale increase. We had a management pipeline so that we could over time replace our own staff with young people who went from cleaner to team leader to manager, and then actually leading things, key parts of our business like inventory management, recruiting and training, and customer service and acquisition. So we saw a huge boost in workers, and then in terms of our company, we saw real growth. We went from 6 workers to 300 workers. We served a lot of Silicon Lagoon's best tech companies, and people were amazed that these were young. The company was manned entirely by young people from a local community, a low-income community. And so we did see how SkillNav for a small business, our own, could boost productivity. And as the young people moved up and replaced themselves, create jobs. So as I mentioned, people came to us and really asked us, hey, how'd you do this? Where'd you find these people? And we said, you can do this. Don't find them, invest in and develop them, make them yourselves. And these were the key areas that certain of our pilot clients and customers really highlighted in terms of a value proposition: transparency about what their workers were doing, understanding their workers' value, reinforcing behavior so they didn't have to nag, and then also making it really easy for folks who sometimes weren't as technologically savvy or didn't have a lot of bandwidth. And so the mechanism and technological and innovative components of SkillNav were really four. So one, we were able to collect from all these different employers in real time their biggest complaints. What are the in-demand skills, or the converse of that? What are the biggest skills gaps you're seeing that are so painful? And then we were able to categorize them by within a specific business, but also across industry and geography. And so now you kind of have a real-time supply, kind of demand map of skills. And then number two, we had a skills taxonomy, because a lot of the times these business owners would say, hey, we want, the skills thing I'm going to complain about is micromanaging and nagging. I am constantly nagging my workers. They just, that's the gap. Or they'll say, oh, they're unprofessional. But constantly having to nag you and unprofessionalism those are kind of more attributes or issues. And it was tough for their workers to really know how to fix those. And so we created a skills taxonomy where we sorted all of these different complaints and gaps, and we broke them down, translating them from attributes into observable, practicable behaviors. So if the complaint is unprofessionalism, I can break that down by level. It could be, is it that, I need your uniform to be clean and unwrinkled and worn every day? Is it that I need you to show up 5 minutes before every meeting with a notebook ready to take notes? Is it that when you come to a meeting, I need you to have read the pre-read and be ready to participate? When it comes to the complaint of nagging, that can be addressed with a very simple behavior that, every time your manager reaches out with a request or instructions, first, clarify your understanding, write it down, and then check back regularly before the due date to make sure you're on track, right? You can almost create like a checklist of behaviors that if you were to follow consistently would become a habit and suddenly make you seem like the attribute. So I might not be professionalism. I might be not professional, but when I follow these specific behaviors and practice them regularly, suddenly I am. So first, the data. Second, the skills taxonomy. Third, based on the gaps and the skills, I can then create a personalized skills curriculum for any given worker. And that is like a career pathway to let you know what you need to do to keep your job, or to earn a bonus, or to even get promoted and move into a new role. The fourth thing was a behavior change system. So once I know what the gap is, once I've broken it down into specific behaviors for you to practice on the job, and I've laid them out in a career pathway for you, now I'm going to just reinforce that with regular feedback from your manager, regular prompts, reflections, and just behavioral nudges that use the best of behavioral science. And so really, for us, SkillNav enables opportunity and good work by identifying the skills that are in demand and closing those gaps, making workers more productive so they can then earn more, and then also along the way, by increasing workers' value, you also increase workers' power, and it allows them to then see, okay, based on the skills that I have, where else could I be, and which employers are offering me the best opportunity to grow and thrive? And it really just comes full circle to this idea that there are good jobs out there. And with SkillNav, our hope is that every small business can provide good jobs just by implementing SkillNav and using regular feedback from the tool, so that young people and indeed workers of any stripe, any level, can continue to develop and grow. So that brings us to the end of the formal part of the discussion. Just as a review, we covered work and what the future of work will be in tech disruption. We covered how school, as traditionally defined, is not going to be enough to overcome the disruptions we're seeing in the world of work. We talked about how ultimately it's about skills and how we can build those competencies, either because we weren't equipped when we left school, or because the world is changing and we need to re-equip. And then we talked about why this really matters in Africa, And then we zoomed into SkillNav specific work in Lagos, Nigeria. Now what I'll do is turn it over to Chandni, who has been monitoring your comments in the chat window. For those of you who have just joined, remember that at the bottom of your screen, there is a chat window, which I can show you also, because I'm so good at Zoom. Let's see here. Okay, there we go. All right, here. So there are a whole bunch of things here in the window. And Chandni, I'll hand it over to you to kind of synthesize some of the questions and comments that came up during the discussion, and then tee up some questions for me and other participants to answer.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for that really good summary of what SkillNav is doing to address the future of work, Clara. It's been very good to see a lot of people engaging very actively in the chat window. And we've had a lot of interesting questions. What I will do is I will try to summarize a few of the questions just so that I'm conscious of time, we can address as many of the questions as possible. So we've had a few interesting questions, particularly around how does SkillNav intend to address this issue of lack of access to digital tech, for example. And that question has actually come up. Both Joel and Muladi had raised this question. So if you could maybe think about addressing how does SkillNav aim to address this issue of lack of access and the digital divide. Mm-hmm. The second question, I think what we'll do is why don't we take them in pairs and then we can sort of go back and forth with that. The other second question that has come up is one around how do we view contextual differences in different regions of the world, and how are we trying to deal with the different needs in these different contexts, whether it's across the continent or whether it's sort of regionally in the country. What I'll do is I'll leave those two questions for you to maybe address, and then we can maybe get to a few more questions, depending on time.
I will try to be pithy. All right, so the first question was about the digital divide. I hear you. I think that in terms of how we address it, I think the truth is this is an infrastructure and investment question. I don't know that this is something we can expect individuals to fix. And by the way, that is something that applies to infrastructure in general. And I would argue that in this world of the digital divide, and in a time when so much of the growth in skills and also in income and earning is going to come through digital and technological work, I think societies need to make the decision to invest in their infrastructure in the same way we would say they need to invest in things like roads and electrification. I think bandwidth is very important, especially in rural areas. And then frankly, yes, we can access a lot of things on our phones, smartphones in particular, and with the advent of 5G. But at some point, there's also the question of whether we distribute laptops as part of a digital New Deal, especially in this time of COVID. So that's what I'll say about digital divide. Chandni, remind me of the second question. You're on mute. Let me see if I can unmute you, Chandni. There you go. What was the second question again?
Yes, the second question was around the contextual differences in different regions. So how are things different in different regions of the world, and how does SkillNav aim to sort of work with these different demands, so to speak, in different parts of the world, or whether it's also just in different parts of Nigeria?
Fair. So here's the truth. I don't think SkillNav would pretend to know everything. We don't know what the skills set is, whether it's tasks, projects, or behaviors for any given company, industry, or geography. Who knows this best? The employers who are suffering the skills gap. And that's why we're collecting this data in real time, and also using machine learning and NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, to actually sort through them. We're in a very nascent stage right now, but using that technology, eventually I want you to be able to go on and as a worker or a teacher or policymaker, and then just say this company, or maybe this industry, this geography, and then see what the top skills gaps are and what the supply and demand in real time of those skills are in your local workforce. What else?
Great, thank you, Clara. So we've got a few more questions. I'm going to shift it a little bit from that line of questioning, and I'm going to take a question that Megan has raised. And she's asking an interesting question about cultivating passion. So she asks, do you feel that jobs today do not cultivate passion and agency? I think that might be an interesting one for us to address next.
I think there are certainly some jobs that very much cultivate passion, fulfillment. I mean, I have to say, you know, I hope this is the case for you, but for me, certainly work has been a very central aspect of my identity, my growth, a lot of my confidence. So much of what defines me actually comes from the work I do. And by that way, that doesn't always have to be paid work, but it is work nonetheless. And I think that it comes down to job design. And one of the things that I tried to raise when talking about the difference between good jobs and bad jobs, decent work and indecent work, is the fact that most work, especially at the bottom of the pyramid, is not good work. While some of us have been lucky, and I am included in that work has been the thing that elevates, develops, and inspires me, I know for other people, work is the thing that crushes, exploits, and drains them. And I think this comes down to job design. I hope SkillNav can help with that, actually, but I wouldn't pretend that we're the only solution. What SkillNav can offer is that it gives employers an incentive to use it. Then, with no more work, with minimal work from the employer, it's able to develop workers and then give workers more data and choice about which employers, whether it's the current one or maybe some other one, that can give them this better and richer work environment. I remember I made a note about this in preparation, so if you'll indulge me. There are these organizations in the United States called community development financial institutions that whose whole job it is to invest in disadvantaged areas. And when they assess how to invest, they actually use a metric of quality jobs. And they say a quality job should at least have three things. One, a living wage. Two, basic benefits like paid leave, health insurance, retirement savings plans. And then number three, a career building opportunity. So whether it's training, mentorship, certainly a career path, the ability to be promoted. Already you're probably realizing not all jobs are quality jobs. But ideally, and this gets a little bit more of what you're saying, it should also, number four, provide a venue or avenue for wealth building, whether that's profit sharing, equity, some sort of retirement match, and then so that you feel ownership and maybe can become indeed an owner of the business. Then number five, also a fair, engaging, and ideally, enriching environment. And for that could be everything from transparency, like the managers explain how the business is going, give you an opportunity to give feedback, have a voice, but also things like flexible schedules, or at the very least predictable schedules, so that you don't find out the night before that you have a shift the next morning and have to scramble for childcare. And also this idea of respect and dignity, that all workers should be treated with that at the very least. And at the very best, things like inspiration and inclusion and belonging. Hopefully that gives you a bit of a perspective. But I agree with you completely that this is a far cry from many jobs today.
Great, thank you, Clara. What I'm going to do now is I'm actually just going to maybe give us an opportunity to hear from someone who's currently on the call. And I have Megan, who's actually raised her hand. So Megan has a question she would like to ask. So if you could maybe unmute yourself, Megan, and please you can ask a question.
Yeah, sure. Hello. First of all, I just want to say wonderful presentation, just overall, just incredible. I'm a freshman in college, and I think SkillNav is just incredible. And I was thinking that, I want to be a social entrepreneur. Just like as the years progress, I just don't know where to start because I don't know what my passions are and like how they will align with creating jobs for others. I'm just wondering if you have any advice on just like how SkillNav can help just college students like me living in Massachusetts.
Absolutely. So right now, SkillNav isn't in your location, but maybe we can talk afterwards and talk about how we might bring it. I think SkillNav is just like a mapping tool. And so it can be helpful, but maybe not in the way you're looking for, Megan. Because the truth is, you use Google Maps, right?
Yeah, I do.
Right. So Google Maps can't tell you where to go, but once you decide where you go, it can help you get there. And I would say SkillNav is similar. For the job inspiration and discovery aspect, which is no less important, SkillNav is not going to be your tool, but I agree it's a very key aspect of, frankly, just getting ready for the workforce. And I wish there were more programs in schools that would allow us to open windows in that area. So I think absent that, I think I would read things like asking these 100 most creative people just to see different paths people have taken. I think LinkedIn, just browsing, but again, if you don't know whose profile to look at, it's difficult. I think looking for inspiration also from mentorship programs, but really looking at these kind of top, like Forbes lists, Schwab, Skoll World Forum, for example, even has awards that they give to social entrepreneurs. Echoing Green is a great source, Ashoka. Looking at some of the paths that people have trodden, hopefully can inspire you to map your own. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Great, thank you so much. That was very, very good to hear. I might maybe just, I'm going to try something here, and I might maybe just do a cold call and see if someone wants to share their question that they have posted. So I'm just going to go to Stuart. Stuart, would you be interested in sharing your question?
Stuart Mills, are you talking about?
Yes, that's you, Stuart Mills.
Okay, great.
Hi, Stuart.
Oh my gosh, I can work out how to do the mute button. Thank you very much, Clara. That's been a fantastic session and just really hit lots of different pieces. I work for a large company called Salesforce, and we do a lot about reskilling, particularly in the digital space.
Yeah.
But a lot of our programs to date have been very US centric, and they've been very thought through from a US mindset. So one of our key topics, and actually while I sort of one of the reasons I dialed in was with your sort of particularly Nigerian and African focus, but is really that regionalization of this sort of topic. We talk quite generically about reskilling and skills development and training in it, but we don't really consider at depth the regional differences. And I'm a Brit in London who's worked in all over the world, and I see a really diverse group of people on this call. It'd just be your perspective on how we have to adapt things like these initiatives that we've talked about today to the different regions that we're in the part of the world, in the way that people learn and develop themselves.
It's so true. And Stuart, I would venture to say also, when I showed the kind of JWell MIT human skills matrix, those skills, like what thinking and what asserting and communicating looks like in different cultures, I think is going to be very different. High context versus low context cultures, more kind of aggressive ones versus ones that kind of are more focused on diplomacy and communal values. So I think that it has to come from local employers, that local color. And that's why I think technology actually can really help us here, so that nobody has to start with a template that must be formulaically applied everywhere, but rather that there can be a framework that local users can populate and fill with local content.
Brilliant, thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, at this time, we are at time, my friends. There are only 4 minutes left. I do appreciate everyone joining. And if this had been a real Skoll World Forum session, we would stick around and maybe go to a pub, right? Because it's Oxford, so you go to a pub, and we would keep talking. I just want to say at this point that I'm very open to staying on the line for an extra 15 to 20 minutes for anyone who'd like to connect. And I will turn off the recording at that time, so we can just connect as though, as an offline sort of session. But I will stay on Zoom. Because we've only a couple of minutes left, I think what I'll do is try to pull together, just again, a couple takeaways, a couple themes that don't necessarily fall into my work, school, skills formula. And so I think one thing that came up a lot was this idea of inequality. It wasn't the explicit aim of this discussion, but I think it can't be separated from a conversation about good jobs and bad jobs, those who benefit from technology and those who are left out. And so, I do want to tee up that we have partners here on the call today from the Selena Center for International Development and Research. Full disclosure, I do serve on the board, and we are exploring a collaboration to use SkillNav to upskill not only frontline healthcare workers, but indeed international development workers overseeing and designing those programs. How can we keep people reskilling and being more impactful there? So there is a session tomorrow morning if you want to hang out some more, talk about capacity building and skills building. I'll also share that the UN has talked about how, and the World Bank know that there are 6 policies that consistently reduce inequality wherever you are. And those policies are: 1, early childhood development and nutrition; 2, universal health coverage; 3, universal access to quality education, SDG 4; 4, just straight up cash transfers to poor families. And I would urge you to check out Give Directly and other UBI kind of initiatives in that area. 5, infrastructure, particularly rural infrastructure that gets at our digital divide question. We're not just talking about computers, we're talking about roads and electrification. And then 6, progressive taxation to pay for it all. So it's just something to think about. And I would also say that, when the United States was disrupted with tractors, in my tech, blast from the past tech example, there was a concerted policy decision, a huge investment from the United States government, which was still young at the time, to say, you know what, we're going to invest in universal high school. We're going to make it mandatory for all children to go to school until the age of 16. And people thought that was crazy because back then you use your kids in the field. But it set America up for a century of prosperity. And I think the other thing I just want to tee up is these are policy decisions. It's not a given that the 4th Industrial Revolution and the skills gap leaves people behind. To some degree, it's a choice. And it's a choice by governments, but it's also a choice by individual employers. The truth is all workplaces are already kind of schools in some way. They have a curriculum. These are the things you need to do. Like, these are the skills you need to master to move up. And they have a pedagogy, a culture. So, maybe it's about making sure this idea of social mobility enterprises can bear fruit. Maybe it's the idea that every workplace in the future will be a school, or indeed that the best and most prosperous companies will be smart enough to realize that in a volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous environment, it behooves them to develop their workers and be schools. So those are all just little crumbs, food for thought at the end of our session. Just want to thank you all again so much for joining us today. And I look forward to